Good morning, Cypress family. It's good to be here with you this morning. For those of you that do not know me, I have not introduced myself just yet. My name is Jacob Linder. I have the privilege of being the student pastor here at Cypress. I've had the pleasure serving on staff for closing in on 2 years now, which is hard to believe. Time flies when you're having fun, and so it's been absolutely incredible so far. It's been an incredible summer so far in student ministry, and I knew I was going to preach a couple weeks ago and wanted to extend a thank you to you guys before we get started. One, I wanted to say thank you for believing in the next generation. A lot of you made a lot of sacrifices to help our student ministry get to camp this year, and sacrificed in many different ways. For some of you, you were crazy enough to give up a week of your vacation to come and serve and make sure that sixth graders shower. That is an incredibly hard job to do, all right? You might want to go back to accounting after that, after making them do that, but I'm incredibly thankful for you and for doing that. I'm thankful for those of you that partnered with us in prayer. A lot of y'all were our prayer warriors that week, and I'm so grateful for you guys. Your prayers were felt, and the Lord answered a lot of those prayers. As Kevin mentioned last week, we saw 30 students baptized between both camps, which is incredible. And that's because of you guys, obviously the Lord moving, but you guys lifting those prayers up to Him. And so we're so grateful for you for being a prayer warrior in that. I also want to say thank you to those of you that helped us and partnered with us financially. We had a lot of students, and you all know that the cost to go to camp is a lot of money. And a lot of y'all stepped in a way to make sure that our students were able to go to camp this summer. And I'm so grateful for you as well for seeing that need and for meeting that need. All that all together, I just want to say thank you. It's so nice to be a part of a church. I'm so thankful to be a part of a church that believes in the next generation and knows that they're not the future of the church, but they're the today of the church. And I'm so grateful and I'm so thankful for that. I'm also thankful for this sermon series that we've been in over the last 2 months that we started this summer with in James. We've been walking through the book of James, Pastor James, who's written it, just addressing and talking through different things in the Christian life, different aspects, different hindrances, things that come up in the Christian life. Last week, Kevin preached and he gave us one word to focus on, and that was dependence. What does it look like for you in your life to be in total and utterly dependence upon the Lord? And how can you be more dependent upon the Lord in all things? You know, I was thinking about that and using like a one-word phrase like that. And I started thinking about this morning and this message, and it brought me to the word perspective. So that's going to be our word of the day today. If you're taking notes with me, you can just write that down. That's what we're going to be looking at is perspective. Your perspective. Now, I don't know about you, but I wasn't great in English. If you saw my ACT score, you would not allow me to be on this stage right now. Full transparency. And so I wasn't great in school by any means until I got to college. And one of those areas was definitely English that I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to. But there's two words that we can get mixed up in particular. That is perception and perspective. And so maybe you're like me and you found yourself this morning having to Google Webster Dictionary the difference between perspective and perception. So let me just break it down real quick before we jump in. So perception is going to be a commonly held viewpoint amongst a large group of people. For instance, in this room, I would venture to say, give or take 60-70% of y'all are LSU fans, all right? So a lot of y'all are LSU fans. Most of you who are LSU fans would agree that we hate Alabama. We would say we don't like Alabama anyway. And so you hate Alabama. And that's a common perception. They're going to be a rival or an enemy of the LSU Tigers. It's commonly held amongst a lot of people. So that's going to be the perception that's laid on. But then you get to perspective. And perspective is going to be the lens in which you see the world through. It's going to be your personal viewpoint, your personal standpoint. And I like the word lens because each and every one of us is looking through a certain lens in how we view this world. You know, I was thinking about that idea of lens and perspective, and it reminded me of a toy I used to play with when I was a kid. I would go to my great-grandmother's house to get this toy. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I loved going to my great-grandmother's house. It was one of my favorite places to go growing up, and I'm so thankful for the times that I got to spend with her. Now, I would remember my dad would come home and tell us that we're going to her house, and we would jump in the car and get all excited. We'd start driving down the road, and then we would get to her street, and like I knew the trees, like the giant oak trees that would just hang over her road. And we'd go down that road. I'm like, man, we're getting close. We're getting so close to great grandmother's house. And then we would turn down the street. We would see like the house that we were looking for her street on her corner. We would see it. Then we would turn in right there. We'd see her driveway, and above her mailbox, it said Linder across it. And we'd pull right on into the driveway. Now, her house was built in the late 50s, 60s. I think I got that correct. Hopefully I do. Looking at my dad who's nodding at me, I think he said yes. 55, built in 55. So it was built in 1955. And we would pull in, and the way they did the driveway back then is you would come in behind the house, and you would actually enter through the kitchen. So we'd get out of the car, and we'd walk through the kitchen. And every time we went to her house, there was something cooking, like always. It never failed. And it smelled like 10 pounds of butter was being cooked in the green beans. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna get high cholesterol from this. I should probably get my blood work done at some point. And so, walk in, you smell the food, and oh, it smells so good. And then you continue to walk back into her house, and she had 2 living rooms. Why in the world someone needs 2 living rooms? I don't know. One was her nice living room, which I'm telling you, from the day I was born till the day that she passed away, which was last year, that living room never changed. So I would venture to say it's been the same from 1955 till the day she passed away, right? Like, she's taken really good care of that living room, so we'd never go in there. But the other living room had the TV, all right? So that's where everybody hung out, and it's called the den. You walk in, and of course, she'd be watching Fox News religiously, as she does, and we'd walk in, and she'd be sitting there in her chair, and behind her chair was a little cabinet. And in this cabinet, she kept toys from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and she always told her kids and grandkids, she said, I'm gonna hold on to these toys so that when I have great-grandkids and grandkids and great-great-grandkids, I can pull out these toys. And so I would go into this cabinet, and I would pull out none other than a kaleidoscope. Y'all ever seen a kaleidoscope before? I pull out a kaleidoscope, right? And so I'd pull out this kaleidoscope, and as a kid, her kaleidoscope was much cooler than this Dollar General kaleidoscope that I got, all right? Hers was you would take it and you'd spin it, right? So it would change the perception. And so I would look through this kaleidoscope. Some of you are red right now, some of you are green, some of you are blue, and there's all kind, like you're being morphed everywhere, honestly. It changes how I'm viewing things. The lens that I look through this life in is crucial and important. Just like I look through a lens of a kaleidoscope, my perspective just changed of all y'all. Some of you were red, some of you were green, some of you were blue, some of you were triangles. You changed because of the lens of what I was looking through. What we're gonna see today as we open up the book of James and we dive into James chapter 5 is we're gonna see James give us the option of 2 lenses to look through in this life. 2 options that we get to look through in this life. Now, I have glasses, so I grew up going to the optometrist, which is the eye doctor, quite often. And when you go to the eye doctor to do an eye exam, they sit you down in a chair. When you get in this chair, there's gonna be the letters on the back of the wall. Now, if you were like me and you didn't wanna get new glasses every year, you try to memorize that bad boy. Like, you sit down in that chair, and I was like, ZFHA. Okay, I got it, right? And you're like sitting down in the chair, and then they come in and they put the big, I don't know, ant-looking, big thing in front of your head with all the lenses in it, right? That big thing in front of you. And then they would do the dirty trick, and they change it. And so then they would, then they ask you to read it. And when they ask you to read it, they would flip through 2 lenses. They would say, is lens 1 better, or is lens 2 better? Is lens 1 better, or is lens 2 better? What we're gonna see this morning, I'm gonna give you the 2 options that we're gonna see from James. What we're gonna see from James is he's about to ask you, is lens 1 better, or is lens 2 better? Is lens 1 better, or is lens 2 better? So what are the 2 lenses that we're gonna look at this morning? What 2 lenses are we gonna see? The first lens that we're gonna look at is the worldly lens, AKA what I'm gonna call this morning the worldly perspective. The worldly perspective. The worldly perspective and the worldly lens is you are chasing after the passions and desires of this world. You are pursuing the things that this world has told you to chase after in to find ultimate satisfaction and happiness. That's what you need to go and you need to chase after. So that's lens number 1 that James is gonna ask us if we're looking through. The second lens that he's gonna ask us if we're looking through is the eternal lens. If you're taking notes this morning, I just want you to write down AKA the eternal perspective. The eternal perspective. The eternal perspective is I don't just see this life, I see everything in view of eternity, and I'm chasing after eternity. I'm storing all my stuff, my time, I'm storing it up for eternity and chasing after Jesus and eternity. So these are the two lenses that James is going to walk us through here this morning. If you have a copy of God's word, I want you to go ahead and open it up. James chapter 5, verses 1 through 12 is what we're going to be in. While you're turning there, let me just give you a little background context on where we are at in the book of James at this point. We know that James is writing to Jewish Christians who are spread abroad. We've seen that in chapter 1, verse 1, where James says that he's writing to that audience. We know that Pastor James is also pastoring the church of Jerusalem. What we know about the church of Jerusalem at this point is that they were between 5,000 to 10,000 people. Now, there's a common misconception amongst people that the church was really small during this day and age. The church of Jerusalem would prove that to be wrong. They were between 5,000 and 10,000 people. So Pastor James is leading 5,000 to 10,000 people, which means he's going to be well in tune with what is going on in his church at this time. He's going to know the hardships, the challenges that early Christians are facing. And so he's writing this letter to address those early challenges. And he's going to put it very black and white for us. If you're just joining us for this sermon series, you're about to see that today. He doesn't beat around the bush, as some would say. No, he's going to give it to you very black and white. I like to tell people that James is the Proverbs of the New Testament. If you do a Proverbs a day in your quiet time with the Lord, you know it's very quick and direct, insightful wisdom from God. James has also given that to us in a very similar way. He's given us direct wisdom, boom, there at your feet, you can have it. And he's going to talk to us about the two lenses in which we can look at this life in, starting in verse 1. Would you mind standing up for the reading of God's holy word, his one and only book, so that we can know him? Aren't you thankful for that? God wants us to know him. Starting here in verse 1. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you cries and against you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you. Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it, until it gets the early and late rains. You too be patient, strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Do not complain, brethren, against one another, so that you yourselves may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. As an example, brethren, of suffering and patience, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. We count those blessed who endured. You have heard the endurance of Job and have seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings, that the Lord is full of compassion and is merciful. But above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but your yes is to be yes and your no to be no, so that you may not fall under judgment. Thank you. You may be seated. Woo, James, he's giving it to us this morning. So James is starting off his letter here in verse 1. And here's the interesting thing about verse 1. He's actually writing about non-Christians to Christians. He's writing about non-Christians to Christians. Well, James, how do we know this? Why are you doing this? These are some questions that we need to answer this morning as we progress forward. Well, one reason that we know that he is writing to non-Christians, he doesn't use the word brethren to start out verse 1. If you look at the dialogue and how he writes the letter, throughout it, you will see that when he addresses the church and those in the faith, he uses brothers and sisters quite often. So that's one way that we know that he's addressing non-Christians, non-believers here in this part of the letter. The second way that we know it is that he uses the terms weep and wail. Not your common language that we would use today. I don't know about you, but you're not walking up to your boss saying weep and wail. Not very common language that you're going to be using. So he uses weep and wail. And what's interesting about that is that the prophets of the Old Testament would use those two words quite often when they were calling out pagan nations. For instance, if you go to Isaiah chapter 13, you will see Isaiah speak to the Babylonians. And when he speaks to the Babylonians, he says, hey, weep and wail. And so we can infer most scholars would all agree that he's talking about non-Christians to Christians. But why in a letter would he pause from a lot of what he was writing about to Christians to address non-Christians? Well, he's doing it to strengthen the Christian. See, the non-Christians in Jerusalem and spread abroad were mistreating the church. If you remember from earlier on in our study of James, you would remember that the church of Jerusalem was broke. They had no money whatsoever. The reason they didn't have any money is because the people who made up the church were not getting jobs and they weren't getting paid for the work that they were doing. Now, I don't know about you, but if I didn't get paid for the work that I was doing, I'd be pretty mad. I think everybody, if I were to ask you that here in this room, would you want to work for free? You'd pretty much say no, right? Right? Okay, thank you. You would say no. You don't want to work for free. I'd be banging down on Kevin's office real fast, y'all. I'd be like, hey, what are we doing? Come on, man. And so they feel like an injustice has happened towards them. They feel like that, like, hey, James, like all this stuff that's happening to us, there's an injustice that has happened and we deserve justice. And here's the thing, I don't blame them. I don't blame them. I don't blame them for wanting justice. You know, when I was a kid, I was in 6th grade, I would get home from middle school earlier than my parents. And there's a TV show that I absolutely loved as a kid. Y'all ever heard of Judge Judy? Anybody? Yeah, come on now, somebody. There we go. All right, so Judge Judy, man, I would go to school, I'd get off of school. If you know anything about Judge Judy, it's a TV show that's been running now for over 25 years. I think they've changed the judge by now. There's no way it's the same Judy. And so they've changed the judge by now. But I loved coming home from school because I get home about 2:15. Judge Judy comes on at 2 o'clock. I know that for a fact. And so it comes on at 2 o'clock. I'd get home from school. I'd throw some pizza rolls in the oven because you got to have a snack after middle school. If you're a parent of a middle schooler, you know what that's like right now. And I would get my pizza rolls, I'd sit on the couch, and I'd turn on Judge Judy. Not Sports Center, Judge Judy, right? And so I'm watching Judge Judy, and I remember this as if it was yesterday. I don't know why it's the most notable one in my brain. But you had I'm just going to use fake names. You had Becky and Bill, okay? Here's Becky and Bill. They've gone through a divorce. Now they're here in front of Judge Judy, and they're fighting over custody of their bunny, their pet bunny. Right? And so I'm like 6th grade Jacob, glued to the TV. And she said, Bill, he's just, he doesn't take care of the bunny. He doesn't like the bunny. He's just trying to get back at her. And so he wants the bunny now. And so I'm over here, Team Becky. I'm like, come on, Team Becky. Becky, give the argument. Like, I wanted justice to be served. Becky got it, by the way, fun fact. And so Becky got the bunny, but I wanted justice, y'all. I wanted justice. And I think we would all agree in this room that we want justice. If it's somebody being mistreated, if we see someone being mistreated, we want justice for that person. Big trials that make it to the media, it's interesting to see how many people get consumed with them because they want justice. Not only that, if we're being mistreated, I want justice. I can tell you that. I want some justice in my life. And I believe the reason that we want justice is because we were created in the image and likeness of God. And there's one thing I know about God. God's a God of justice. God's a God of justice. And he's the perfect example of justice. The absolute perfect example of justice. And since we are created in the image and the likeness of God, that means that we're going to be a people of justice who want justice. And so I don't blame the church that he's writing to. I don't blame these Christians. I would want that level of that level of justice to happen. And so James is writing to him and he's saying, hey, here's the deal. Here's the deal. Justice is not yours to serve. It's not yours. You need to be patient with these people. You need to understand the lens in which they are viewing the world. That's what you need to see. You need to see how they're viewing this life and this world because vengeance is not yours. Justice is not yours. And let me tell you something. If justice was mine and you wronged me, it probably wouldn't be a godly response. And I don't think for these Christians who've been wronged, it would have been a very godly response that they would have given. And so he's saying, hey, you need to be patient. Be patient with these people and understand the perspective of where they are coming from. That enters the picture of what we're going to look at here this morning. If you're taking notes with me, I just want you to write down verses 1 through 6. Verses 1 through 6, put earthly perspective. Verses 1 through 6, earthly perspective. These are the verses that we're going to deal with, the earthly perspective. So we get into to verses 2 and 3 here, and we get into verses 2 and 3. You see James start to paint out what an earthly perspective is like. He says this in particular, your riches have rotted, your garments have become moth-eaten, your gold and your silver have rusted, and the rust will be witness against you and consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. I mean, he's going at it pretty hard on with the earthly perspective here. And what he's saying is an earthly perspective, the earthly lens, is to chase after and to find the things that are going to bring you ultimate happiness in this life. Our culture in this world has been trying to sell us a bag of goods to buy into and to believe in, that if we just believe in this life being our only life, then we store up as much as we can, we're going to find ultimate satisfaction and happiness. This is the lie that our kids live in, our students live in, us as adults live in, senior adults. We live in this culture of lies trying to sell us this bag of false goods that this life is all there is. And because this life is all there is, then you need to store up as much as you can in this life. There's a popular saying that went around in 2012. I would have been a freshman in high school, so there's my age if y'all want to guess it. I'm not 18, a little bit older than that. So 2012, I was going into freshman year of high school. And there's a saying that became really popular. And it was an acronym, and it was this, YOLO, which stands for You Only Live Once. You only live once. YOLO. And so all of a sudden, you see these people in 2012 buying into this lie that the culture has started to feed of YOLO. And so people are going skydiving, people are jumping off rocks, people are showing off the cars and the new stuff that they're getting, and they are using the hashtag YOLO. You only live once. And this is the bag of goods that our world has tried to sell us, that the world has tried to give us. If you just achieve and have these things, you'll find the satisfaction and the happiness. But what we see there in verse 3 is James is going to address this. In verse 3, James addresses it immediately and says, guess what? Hey, the clothes that you have, the moths are going to come and destroy. The riches that you have stored up are going to rot. The gold and silver that you have is going to corrode. What James is saying is, if you live this life with an earthly perspective and you're trying to find your happiness in this world, it's all going to corrode at some point. It's all going to go away. You know what I found interesting is that James would use gold. Now, I'm not a goldsmith in any way. I can tell you that at all. I know nothing about gold. But I know people that do. So I called a jewelry store here in Bossier. I'm hoping the lady that helped me shows up today. It'd be awesome if she was here. Shout out if you're here this morning. But I was just curious. So I called a lady at a jewelry store. Like, why not? Let's just see what she says about it. So I was like, hey, ma'am, my name's Jacob. I'm a pastor over at Cypress Baptist Church. Hey, I'm preaching on this week, and I'm really confused. Like, does gold corrode? And she's like, no, gold does not corrode. Pure gold does not corrode. But gold mixed with an alloy will corrode, but the alloy will corrode, not the gold. Pure gold in itself will not corrode. What we know about the ancient Near East at this time is the gold they had was most likely pure gold. And so then I get off the phone with her and I start thinking, James, what are you talking about when you say the gold is going to corrode? And it dawned on me. James is saying that even what you think is the surest thing in this life is going to corrode. Even what you think is the surest thing in this life is going to corrode. And I don't know what that looks like for you. If you're not walking with Jesus here in this room and walking with a worldly perspective, I don't know what you are banking your faith and trust in. But let me just tell you, because I love you and I care about you, it's going to corrode at some point. It's not going to last for all eternity. It's going to corrode. And I think there's a warning in here for the believer, though. Believer, be on guard. Be on guard. Even if you're living with an eternal perspective, sometimes when things start to go wrong around us, the world's ideology starts to step in on us. And then all of a sudden, you're playing both sides of the field. Don't do that, believer. Believer, you need to stay on guard and keep an eternal perspective that we'll talk about here in just a minute. But if you don't know Jesus, I love you enough to tell you that what you're putting your faith and trust in right now, at some point is going to corrode. Not only if you are living for this world and living in view of this world through the lens of this world, not only are you storing up riches here on earth when you have a worldly perspective, but you're also consumed with yourself. You live a self-indulgent lifestyle. James talks about this in verse 4, and in verse 4, he's talking about the owners of the fields who were withholding pay from their employees. They were cheating their employees out of a paycheck. They were cheating employees out of a paycheck. And so he's telling us here, when you are driven by the world, when you are looking at life in view of this world, you will hurt people in the pursuit of your own happiness. I told you a minute ago, what did the world tell you is most important? What does our culture tell you that's of the utmost importance? Of the utmost importance is your happiness. When you are self-focused, when you are only viewing this life in view of yourself, you are going to hurt people in the process because you're consumed with yourself. And the workers of this day and age were consumed with themselves. See, here's what they wanted to happen. They wanted the Jerusalem church and the early Christians to close down their doors and not be a part of this. Let's get rid of Christianity. Let's wipe it out. That's what they wanted. Why they were withholding pay? Let's just get rid of this church because it's not good for our business and what we're trying to do. So we're trying to get rid of them. They were consumed and focused on themselves. There's a movie that came out in the 2000s called the Social Network. Anybody? Social Network? Okay, a couple of y'all. That's all good. The Social Network is a movie based on the founding of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. And what you see in this movie is the backstory of Facebook and how it was created. You had Mark Zuckerberg and his friend who were at Harvard who made Facebook together because they wanted to make a social media platform, all those different things. So they go and they make Facebook together. And as they go and they make Facebook, it becomes very successful very early on. And what they start to realize is if we're going to expand this business and we're going to make this business better, then we're going to have to get more capital involved. Essentially, they needed money. They needed somebody. They were broke college students. They needed somebody to come in and invest in them. So Mark Zuckerberg goes out. He finds somebody who will invest in their business, and they bring in this third-party investor. When they bring this third-party investor in, he convinces Mark Zuckerberg to get his friend out. And what do? They rewrite company policies, they sell off his buddy's stock, and all of a sudden, they've moved his friend out of the company. They cheated him out of the company that he helped found. They cheated him out of it. You wanna know why they cheated him out of it? And listen, I don't know Mark Zuckerberg personally, but I can tell you what God's word says about it, because he was in the pursuit of his own happiness. He was in the pursuit of his own happiness. That was what was most important to him. And that's the bill of goods that our world and culture has tried to set in on us and tried to impress in on us. And James reminds the early church that God sees this injustice. He reminds the believers in this, hey, I know that you guys are being hurt right now. I know that you guys are not getting the wages that you deserve, but God sees you. Again, justice is not yours. God sees you in this. He's known as Lord of Sabaoth, which is here. In some translations, it's gonna be Lord of angel armies or Lord of armies. He's saying the Lord of armies hears you, early church. He knows what you're walking through. Be patient. Don't serve justice. The Lord's gonna bring justice. But for you who are not walking with Jesus, he's also issuing a warning to you, saying, hey, this is what the world has filled you in on. And you know what's crazy? It still hasn't changed today. What the culture is trying to achieve back then still has not changed today. The same issue that James wrote about thousands of years has not changed today. And so what does he do when he gets into verses 5 and 6? He says, let me give you a warning about living with a worldly perspective. If you're here this morning living apart from Jesus, this is the warning that James is going to give you here this morning. He says this, and I'm going to read it because it's very harsh verbiage in how he writes it, but we got to know it. He says, you have lived a life of luxury on the earth and led a life of want and pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. So my grandfather owned a farm growing up, and I'd go to grandma and grandpa camp sometimes in the summer and hang out with them on the farm. My grandfather had a bunch of cows on this farm, and so he would go and he would butcher these cows. Now that was hard for me because I would name these cows as a kid, and I'd see them grow up and they'd be disappeared at some point, which is pretty sad. But we would go and you'd pick a cow, and what's interesting about these cows on the day of slaughter is they have no idea. They have no idea. The cow has no idea. See, if I was a cow and I knew the day of slaughter was coming, I wouldn't eat. Because nobody's walking into that field saying, I want the skinny one. No, they want the biggest cow on that lot, right? I want some ribeyes with some marbling. Texas Roadhouse style. Come on, somebody. That's what I want. Like, that's what I'm after. I'm not picking no skinny cow. But see, the cows, they have no idea. They don't know. And so they go and they eat without even knowing. They eat and they eat and they eat, even on the day of slaughter, not knowing that they're going to die. And they continue to eat and eat. Essentially, the warning that James is giving to you, if you're looking at life with a worldly perspective apart from Jesus, if you're living a life apart from Jesus, what he's saying is Jesus is going to return. He's near and he's dear. He's going to return. And how you decide to live this life is going to determine where you spend eternity. Essentially, another way of putting it like this is, may we not be like the cows enjoying our stuff, unaware that we're about to be destroyed. Whew. May we not be like the cows enjoying our stuff, unaware that we're about to be destroyed. The warning here is to turn away from yourself and to trust in Jesus. That's the warning here. He's saying, hey, the day of slaughter is coming. And for you in the room, if you don't know Jesus, I'm pleading with you, I'm begging with you, and I'm saying, Jesus wants your heart. And he loves you and he cares about you so much that he was willing to get off of his throne, to live this life, to go to the cross, to die for your sins and raise 3 days later. Because he wants you to have eternal perspective. He doesn't want you to have an earthly perspective. Because that earthly perspective is never going to fill you. It never will. But eternal perspective will when you fix your eyes upon Jesus. And so what you got to do is you got to take the kaleidoscope of this world, you got to throw it to the side, and you got to pick up the kaleidoscope of Jesus by putting your faith and trust in him. And so that's the warning that he's giving. That's the warning that he gives us there. But now he's going to switch gears. Now in verses 7 through 11, he's switching gears. He said, okay, now let me talk to the believer. Let's go back to the believer. Now he says, hey, brethren, brothers and sisters, here we go. Now I'm going to address the church. If you're taking notes with me, I want you to write down eternal perspective. That's the second part of this right here, eternal perspective. And in this eternal perspective, as he talks to believers, he's saying, okay, I know what you're dealing with. I know the issues that have come about in the church. I know they're not paying you. I know the injustices. But here's the thing, believer. God's got it all under control. He's got it, and you need to be patient. He uses the word patient independence here. Patient independence, like a farmer. So I just told you about my grandfather. He had cows, right? He also had a crop that he grew. And this crop, he would grow soybeans and corn and all the different things. And here's what I know from my grandfather about growing crop, is that if you get too much rain, it's gonna rot. If you get too little rain, like we experience down here a lot, it's gonna dry up, it's gonna be a drought. And then if there's a cold front that comes through and it frosts, it's gonna freeze. Do you know a farmer has to have the ultimate dependence upon God to provide? I have seen my grandfather on his hands and knees praying for rain. I've seen my grandfather on his hands and knees praying that it doesn't freeze. I have seen him on his hands. He's one of those godly men that I've ever been around in my entire life. And the reason that I'm standing on this stage here today is because of that man. And I saw him in full dependence and surrender to the Lord no matter the circumstance around him. I saw years where there wasn't an inch of rain, but you know what? By God's grace, he made it. By God's grace, he made it. Because he couldn't control the weather. He had zero control over the weather. Zero. But he was still dependent upon the Lord, saying, you know what, Lord, I know you still have it. I know you're in control of it. Even though I can't control my circumstances, I know you got it, God. And so what I'm trying to tell you here this morning is we need to be like a farmer, trusting God with what we cannot control. We can't control the injustices that are going to happen to us. Believer, the truth of the matter is when you wake up every single day, you are going to war against this world. Everything outside this room's against you. This world's against you. It is. We got physical things that we're going to deal with here in this world that are tough, from family issues to bosses to disease. You name it, sin has utterly destroyed this world. And so it's tough. Not only do we have the issues right there, you also have spiritual issues that we're dealing with when we have the spiritual warfare happening around us. Everything is against us. And what James is saying, he's saying, hey, you can't control everything in your life. You can't. But God's got it. He's got you and he's got it. You got to trust him in that. And in the meantime, don't be patient and don't sit idle. In the meantime, just because God's got it doesn't mean don't go and you don't labor. One thing I knew about my grandfather is if it was a season of drought, he would figure out a way to get water out there. If there was bugs killing his crop, he was gonna go find a way to get rid of the bugs. If it was too much rain, he was out there gonna dig a trench and he was gonna make a way to get the water out there. He wasn't sitting idle. He wasn't sitting idle. Just like as a follower of Jesus, just because God's got the situation, he's got his arms over it, doesn't mean that you sit there and you be idle. No, you are still active because you're keeping an eternal perspective. What I see with believers a lot of the time is they stop being active because they're only viewing and seeing this life. This is the significance of an eternal perspective. A lot of times what I see in believers and why they are struggling with the circumstances and the things happening around them is because they only see this life. You know, I saw this illustration many years ago by a guy named Francis Chan. And it illustrates eternity, probably one of the best ways that I've seen eternity illustrated. So I'm gonna grab this rope here and bring it on the stage. So I got this rope right here. Here's my rope. Here on this rope in red, this is your life. Right here in the red. There's a day that you're born. Here, I guess on this end right here is the day that you're born. Then you go to kindergarten. Then you go to middle school, which is awful for everybody. If you're a middle schooler, it just is. Then you go to high school, and it's good for some people, not so good for others. I'm in the not so good boat, it's okay, right? Then you go to college, or you go into the workforce. Then you leave college or the workforce, and you continue to inch along in life. You get married, and you have kids, and you're working a job for all of this just to enjoy that at the very end, right? Retirement's a scam, good grief. I'm like, y'all laughing. I got like 30-something years left. Like, I should be laughing. Oh, man, I could go on a sermon on that, good grief, right? But here you go. This is your life. This is it. This is your life. And as a believer, sometimes we get so fixated on this red and the circumstances and the things going on that we forget all about eternity in the white. Believer, the stuff that you are going through in this world compares in comparison to what is going to happen in the white. Glory is so much better in the white than what's going to happen in this world. And the question is, what are you living for? What are you living for? Are you living for the red? Are you living for the hopefully 70 years that you're going to get on this face of this earth? Or are you living for the white? You know what I see with believers who are in love with Jesus? I see believers that don't see the red right here. They see this. And they're like, you know what I'm going to do? I don't care if my HVAC unit goes out. I don't care if my boss is a jerk. I don't care whatever I face. I'm focusing on this because I was bought with a price. And that is so much more significant than this. I told you about all the stuff that's going to corrode. Remember that? I told you all the stuff that's going to corrode, like the gold, even the surest thing we think is going to corrode. Matthew 6, 19 through 20. I don't know about you, but I want to store my riches up in heaven where nor moth nor rust destroys. And you want to know what the greatest rich is in eternity? The people that I bring with me. A lot of times the believers that are focused on this stop living missionally. They stop living missionally. They stop viewing people as the mission. Believer, if you want to be more evangelistic, you want to be more on fire for Jesus and bringing people with you, then start focusing on eternity. Start storing your riches in heaven. I don't know about you, but there is people that I am dying for to see in eternity with me one day. And I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to spend all this red figuring out how I can get them there and how I can get them to meet Jesus. You want to know why you're not as evangelistic as you want to be? Because you're focusing too much on this life. It's time to get back on the mission, believer. Stop focusing on your life. Stop making it about you and start making it about eternity. So we need to have an eternal perspective on the mission. An eternal perspective on the mission comes from focusing on eternity. Then he gets into verse 9. When he gets into verse 9, he starts addressing believers who are quarreling with each other. In lack of better terms, these leaders were having issues with each other. These believers were. And what we see in this is he uses some language towards them that they were fighting. And this fighting that they were having was because of the outside pressures of this world coming in. They were dealing with a lot. They were dealing with lack of money. They were dealing with not having jobs. And so the pressures of the world started coming in on the church, and all of a sudden, unity in the church started to become a problem. It started to become a big problem. And let me tell you, I've seen the smallest issues become some of the biggest problems in some churches. This third church that I've had the privilege of serving at, I have seen an argument over the placement of a TV. A TV. Now, I don't know about you, but I think figuring out how to reach more people for the gospel is more important than figuring out where the placement is for the TV. And so there's an issue here. These believers are starting to quarrel, having issues with one another. And James says, okay, this is what you need to do. You need to have an eternal look on unity within the church. You need to have an eternal look on unity as a believer in Jesus. Believer, I need you, you need me, we need each other. We need each other. I just told you, everything out there is against us. Why do we want to be against each other? This should be a spot in which we're carrying one another's burdens, walking with one another. This is what we are supposed to be as the local body of Christ. This is who we're supposed to be. And James illustrates it like this, or here I'll illustrate it kind of the way that James is talking about it. He says the judge is at the door. You know, me and my friends, we would get into trouble growing up, just like any teen boy, but like not bad trouble. So you hear your student pastor saying bad trouble. Gosh, you aren't let me around your kids anymore. It's all good. But you know, we would go and we'd make plans to do stuff. So we'd go over to my friend's house and we'd have plans, you know, just harmless, ding dong ditch, you know, roll somebody. It's a good thing I didn't live here because I could call out some names of people, so you know, I rolled. And so we would make these plans. Little did we know that his mom was outside the door, eavesdropping, hearing the whole thing. And then she'd barge in and we would get in trouble. What James is saying is the judge is standing at the door. That means Jesus is standing at the door to return. How's he going to find his church? Is he going to find his church unified, supporting one another, focusing on eternity, chasing after the same mission? Or is he going to find us fighting amongst another? And I pray that he would find us unified with one another. I pray that we would always have an eternal aspect on unity. We get to verses 10 through 11, and we see James says, okay, all right, I've told you to have an eternal look on the mission. I've told you to have an eternal look on unity. Now you need to have something to encourage you. You need more encouragement. You need more encouragement. Where can I find more encouragement? He says, look to the prophets of the Old Testament. Go look at the prophets. Go look in God's word and see the prophets of the Old Testament. And he uses Job here. Job, who we see in the Old Testament, is who's a righteous man, a man who loves the Lord and was very blessed amongst the Lord. He had all kinds of flocks and kids and people serving him in his household. He had all kinds of different things. As God talks about Job, Satan approaches God and claims that Job only follows him because he's been blessed by him. And so God allows Satan to inflict some things onto Job, but he says, just don't take his life. It's the only thing that I'm not going to let you do is take his life. Satan goes out and he kills all of his servants, kills his livestock, kills all of his kids in one day. One day. Now, I don't know about you. I've had some really bad days, like really bad. I have 2 under 3. If you've ever been through that season, you know what it's like, right? And tough days, real tough. Hard days. I haven't had a day that bad where I've lost everything. Job's response to losing everything is he shaves his head and he goes and he worships the Lord. Well, Satan's like, man, he just worshiped the Lord. I got to continue to inflict him. So Satan comes and he inflicts sores on him. Job gets these sores and it's awful and he has these sores. Then we see that Job's friends come along and they start to offer him bad advice, not godly advice anyway. It's a sermon for another day on your friends. But at the very end of the book, the very end of it, towards the end of Job's life, what we see as the Lord comes down and speaks to him is that he restores everything Job ever had twofold. Everything that Job had, he restores twofold. What James is saying here is that you have to keep an eternal perspective on suffering. You have to keep an eternal perspective on the things of this life that we've talked about and mentioned here before. I've told you, God is El Roi. He's the God who sees. God's got you. Focus on his promises and focus on eternity. And as you focus on eternity, you will live a life that reflects the Lord. And this is where we're going to park the bus today. Verse 12, one of the most popular verses in all the Bible. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Here's what was happening in Jewish culture and why James is writing this. See, they would go and make these oaths called binding oaths and non-binding oaths. And essentially, it would be as if I looked at Trey Harville right here and I was shaking his hand and I crossed my fingers and put it behind my back. And so the Jews were kind of becoming untrustworthy. There was an issue with how trustworthy they were being. And so James is writing to them saying, hey, your yes needs to be yes and your no needs to be no. Well, Jacob, in light of us looking at having an eternal perspective, where does that fit in? Let me tell you how it fits in. You, as a follower of Jesus, are a walking reflection of him. You are a walking reflection of God. And here's what I know about God. When God makes a promise, he keeps a promise. When God makes an oath, he keeps an oath. He doesn't go back on his word. He makes it and he sticks to it. How do I know this? Promise made to Abraham. Abraham, I'm going to father a nation through you, and I'm going to bless the whole world through your nation. What does God do? Sends his son Jesus, and he saves the entire world and blesses the entire world because of him. What else do we see? Let's look at Noah. Noah. We see with Noah, God says, hey, I'm going to wipe out the world with a flood. Noah, I need you to build an ark. Noah goes, he builds an ark. He gets off the ark and God says, let's make a covenant together. They make a covenant. God says, I'm never going to flood the world and wipe out humanity again. Here's how you're going to know it, Noah. I'm going to put a bow in the sky, rather known as a rainbow in the sky. Guess what? Promise made right there from the Lord, and it's been kept. Then we see with David. David, I'm going to establish a king who sits on the throne forever. Your throne forever. And let me tell you something, church. There's a king sitting on David's throne forever and ever in all eternity. His name's Jesus. And here's the key thing that we have to focus on. If we are going to be a reflection of our king, then we have to be people of our word so that when I keep an eternal perspective and mission, when I share the gospel with people, they know that they can believe it to be true. How can they believe in something if I'm a liar? And what's happened in our world, what has happened in our world is we've decided as Christians, I'm talking Christian culture, what we've decided to do is focus on the red of our life. And if that means I have to say yes but lie about it because it makes it easier on me, then I'm gonna do it. If I have to say no because it's gonna make it easier on me, then I'm going to do it. And we've traded the eternal lens for the temporary because we don't wanna deal with the hardship of actually saying yes or no to something. And then what happens is we become liars to those people. And then when we go to share the gospel with them, they're like, man, how can I trust you? You lied to me about this. Believer, your witness is so important. And what he's saying here is keep an eternal view on your witness for the kingdom. Keep an eternal view on the witness for him. Your actions and the things you do matter when you keep the mission in front of you. It matters.